Daniel Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel as his truck rumbled down the familiar stretch of Highway 17. The late summer sun cast long shadows over the asphalt, and the warm breeze carried the faint scent of pine and dust through the open window. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a sense of homecoming, something he hadn't let himself feel through the endless deployments and the chaos of war. Ahead, the town of Cedar Hollow came into view. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the sight stirred a mix of emotions in Daniel: relief at being back and apprehension about what awaited him. After nearly a decade of service as a Marine, he wasn't sure if he still belonged here. The quiet suburb seemed untouched, frozen in time, but Daniel knew that appearances could be deceiving. The truck's tires crunched over gravel as he pulled into the driveway of his childhood home. His heart swelled at the sight of the modest white house with its wraparound porch and faded green shutters. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine peace, dinners on the porch, the sound of birds in the morning, a life free of alarms and battle orders. But the illusion shattered as his eyes took in the scene before him. The house had been defaced. Slurs and crude symbols covered the pristine siding in jagged red paint. The porch was scorched, blackened by what looked like a firebomb. Broken glass and beer bottles littered the lawn, and a charred piece of what used to be a welcome mat lay near the steps. Daniel slammed the brakes, his heart pounding. For a long moment, he sat frozen, his mind struggling to process the destruction. Then, anger surged through him, sharp and consuming. He pushed the door open and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached the house. A burst of laughter made him turn his head sharply. Down the street, a group of men loitered near the fence line. 6 of them, each wearing an air of smug confidence. Their shaved heads gleamed in the sun and tattoos of swastikas and iron vulture insignias marked their arms. They leaned casually against a rusted pickup truck, cans of cheap beer in hand, their eyes fixed on Daniel. One of them, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, tipped his can in mock salute. "Welcome home, soldier," he called out, his voice dripping with derision. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. His military training screamed at him to stay calm, assess the situation, and act only when necessary. But the anger bubbling inside him made it hard to think clearly. "Get off my property," Daniel barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The group exchanged amused glances before the scarred man stepped forward. "Or what?" he taunted, spreading his arms wide. "You gonna call the cops? Good luck with that." The others laughed, their mockery echoing down the quiet street. Daniel's gaze flicked to their truck. Baseball bats and spray paint cans were visible in the bed, tools of intimidation and destruction. "This is your only warning," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "Leave, now." Scar's smirk widened as he took another swig of beer. "You don't get it, do you? This is our town now. We decide who stays and who goes. And you, Marine, don't belong here." The words hit like a slap. Not just for their insult but for what they implied. These men weren't just thugs, they were trying to take over. To drive people like Daniel out of Cedar Hollow. He thought of the families he'd fought to protect overseas, of the homes he'd seen reduced to rubble. And now, here he was, facing a new kind of battlefield on his own doorstep. "Last chance," Daniel said, taking a step forward. "Leave." The laughter stopped. The air grew heavy with tension as Scar and his crew exchanged glances. Then, with a sneer, Scar spat on the ground and nodded toward Daniel. "You think you scare us, soldier boy? You're nothing here." Before Daniel could respond, Scar turned and motioned to his crew. They moved toward their truck, their pace leisurely, as if daring him to stop them. One of them grabbed a bottle from the truck bed and hurled it at the house. It shattered against the porch, scattering glass across the steps. Daniel's chest heaved as he fought to keep control. He watched them climb into the truck, their laughter echoing as they sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and the sting of humiliation behind. For a long moment, Daniel stood in the middle of the lawn, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind raced with questions and a rising sense of urgency. Who were these men? What had happened to his town? And how far were they willing to go? He turned back to the house, the sight of the damage twisting a knife in his chest. This wasn't just an attack on his property, it was a message. One meant to intimidate and humiliate. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Daniel Hayes wasn't just a Marine, He was one of the most highly trained operatives in his unit. A man who had faced and defeated enemies far more dangerous than a gang of bigots. And he wasn't going to let them take his home without a fight. The battle lines had been drawn. Cedar Hollow was his town. And he was ready to remind anyone who challenged that. Daniel spent the next hour walking the perimeter of his property, taking in the full extent of the damage. Every mark, every shard of glass, every charred piece of wood spoke volumes about the hatred that had seeped into Cedar Hollow while he was away. His boots crunched over the broken remnants of his welcome mat, and he bent to pick up a spray paint can discarded near the porch. The cold metal in his hand felt heavier than it should. He examined the red stains on his fingers, his jaw tightening. This wasn't just vandalism. This was an attack, a statement. One that demanded a response. The low rumble of a car engine broke the silence, drawing his attention to the street. A silver sedan rolled to a stop in front of his house. And his sister, Maya Carter, stepped out. Her curly black hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her eyes scanned the scene with growing horror as she approached. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling, "what the hell happened here?" "Just some welcoming committee," Daniel replied, his tone clipped as he dropped the spray can onto the porch. "Nothing I can't handle." Maya's expression shifted from shock to anger as she stepped closer, taking in the graffiti and the broken windows. "This wasn't just some prank. Daniel, this is a hate crime." "I know," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I met the ones who did it." Maya froze. "You talked to them? Are you insane? These people aren't just punks, they're dangerous." Daniel folded his arms, his gaze steady. "They're cowards. They're used to scaring people who can't fight back. They picked the wrong house." Maya shook her head, her hands gripping her hips. "You don't get it. This isn't just about you. They've been doing this all over town. Breaking windows, spray painting slurs, burning things. Black families, immigrant families, they're driving people out." "How long has this been going on?" Daniel asked, his voice sharp. "Months," Maya said. "People tried going to the police, but nothing ever came of it. The cops either don't care or are too scared to act." Daniel's stomach churned. He'd fought wars to protect innocent people, only to come home and find the same kind of terror on his doorstep. "Why didn't you tell me?" Maya's eyes flashed with frustration. "What was I supposed to say?" "Hey, Daniel, welcome home. By the way, there's a gang of racist thugs trying to take over the town? You had enough to deal with overseas." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't just your problem. It's mine now too." Maya sighed, running a hand over her face. "You're one man, Daniel. These people aren't just a few idiots with spray cans. They've got numbers, money, and connections. It's not something you can fight alone." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "I won't be fighting alone." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And who's going to help you?" "The neighbors who are too scared to speak up. The cops who won't even take a report." Daniel didn't answer right away. His mind was already turning, running through the names of people he could call. Marcus and Logan had been through hell with him in the Marines. They were more than friends, they were brothers. If anyone would have his back, it was them. "I'll figure it out," he said finally. "But I'm not letting this slide." Maya studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "Just be careful, okay? These people aren't going to play fair." "I don't need them to," Daniel said. "I just need them to show up." Maya didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "I'll help any way I can. Just promise me you won't do anything reckless." Daniel gave her a faint smile. "You know me. That's what worries me," she muttered, turning back toward her car. "I'll bring over some supplies later. You're going to need them." As Maya drove away, Daniel stepped back onto the porch and stared at the house. The damage was extensive, but it was repairable. What wasn't repairable was the fear these men had tried to instill. He'd seen fear like this before, in war zones, in towns and villages where tyrants ruled through violence and intimidation. But this wasn't a war zone. This was home. Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping on a familiar name: Marcus Fields. Marcus had been his squad leader during one of their toughest deployments. He was sharp, resourceful, and utterly reliable. Daniel hit call. The line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Carter? Is that you?" "It's me," Daniel said. "I need your help." There was a pause. "What's going on?" "I'll explain everything when you get here," Daniel said. "But it's bad, Marcus. Real bad. Marcus didn't hesitate. Send me the address. I'll be there by tomorrow. Thanks, man, Daniel said, relief flooding through him. Don't thank me yet, Marcus replied. You sound like you're about to drag me into some serious expletive. You wouldn't be wrong, Daniel said with a faint smile. See you soon. As he ended the call, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't alone in this. He would rally the people he trusted, fight back against the hate that had taken root in his town, and remind the iron vultures that Cedar Hollow wasn't theirs to claim. This was only the beginning. The next morning, Daniel was up before dawn. The night had been restless, his mind churned with plans and possibilities. He'd cleaned up some of the debris around the house, but the scars remained. The scorched porch, the spray-painted slurs, the broken windows, they were a constant reminder of why he couldn't back down. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in muted pinks and oranges, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Daniel stepped off the porch, his shoulders straightening at the sight of his old friend. Marcus Fields climbed out of the driver's seat, his tall, broad-shouldered frame a reassuring presence. Carter, Marcus greeted, his deep voice carrying a note of warmth beneath its gruffness. Fields, Daniel replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The two men clasped hands, their grip firm, a gesture that spoke of years of shared battles and trust. Marcus glanced at the house, his sharp eyes taking in the damage. Damn, you weren't kidding when you said it was bad. It's worse than it looks, Daniel admitted. This isn't just about my house. There's a gang, calling themselves the Iron Vultures. They've been terrorizing people for months. Black families, immigrants, anyone they see as different. Marcus frowned, his expression hardening. And the cops? Either scared or complicit, Daniel said. Nobody's doing anything to stop them. Marcus shook his head. Sounds familiar. Different battlefield, same fight. Daniel nodded. That's why I called you. I can't do this alone. You're never alone, Marcus said firmly. You've got me. And if this is as bad as you say, we'll need Logan. I was thinking the same thing, Daniel said, already pulling out his phone. He found Logan Trent's number and hit call. Logan answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. Carter? This better be important. It's 6 in the morning. It's important, Daniel said. I need your help. Cedar Hollow's got a problem. And it's bigger than I can handle on my own. Logan groaned. Of course it does. What kind of problem are we talking about? Racist gang, Daniel said bluntly. They've been targeting families and businesses. And last night they hit my house. Marcus is already here. We need you. There was a pause, and then Logan sighed. All right, I'm in, but you owe me coffee when I get there. Done, Daniel said. See you soon. After the call ended, Marcus raised an eyebrow. He's coming? Of course, Daniel said. Logan can't resist a fight, especially one where he gets to punch a few bigots. Marcus chuckled. True enough. So, what's the plan? For now, we wait for Logan, Daniel said. Once he's here, we'll figure out our next move. By mid-afternoon, Logan Trent's motorcycle roared into the driveway. He killed the engine and swung off the bike, pulling off his helmet to reveal a scruffy beard and a crooked grin. Carter, Fields, Logan greeted, his voice full of easy confidence. You two look as miserable as ever. And you look like you just woke up. Marcus shot back. Close enough, Logan said, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. So, what kind of trouble have you dragged me into this time? Daniel motioned toward the house. See for yourself. Logan's grin faded as he took in the vandalism. His hands tightened into fists. And his voice dropped. Son of a expletive. Yeah, Daniel said. This is what they've been doing. My house is just one of many. Logan turned back to Daniel, his eyes blazing. So, what's the plan? Please tell me it involves teaching these expletives a lesson. It does, Daniel said, his voice calm but steely. But we're not just looking for a fight. This is bigger than the gang. They've got funding, connections, maybe even political backing. If we're going to take them down, we need to hit them where it hurts. Marcus nodded. Intel, logistics, and leadership. We dismantle the operation from the inside out. Exactly, Daniel said. But first, we need to figure out where they're operating from and how deep this goes. Logan smirked. Sounds like a plan. Let's get started. That evening, the three men piled into Marcus's SUV and drove through the quiet streets of Cedar Hollow. Daniel had already heard rumors from Maya and some of the neighbors about where the Iron Vultures liked to hang out, an old scrapyard on the outskirts of town. It was secluded, easy to defend, and just the kind of place a gang like theirs would call home. As they approached the scrapyard, Marcus pulled over and killed the lights. The three men climbed out and moved on foot, sticking to the shadows as they approached the chain-link fence surrounding the property. Through the gaps in the fence, they could see the gang's operation in full swing. A group of men lounged around a fire pit, drinking and laughing. Others were working on what looked like stolen cars, their tools clanging loudly in the night. A makeshift garage stood in the center of the yard, and further back, Daniel spotted a building with boarded-up windows, likely their main hideout. Logan crouched beside him, his expression serious. "That's a lot of activity for a small-town gang." Marcus nodded. "This isn't small time. They're organized." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We'll need to confirm how many there are and what they're planning. If we rush in blind, we're just asking for trouble." Logan grinned. "Since when have we avoided trouble?" Marcus shot him a look. "Since we started trying to win." Logan chuckled softly but nodded. "Fair point." As they observed, Daniel pulled out a small notebook and started jotting down details: the number of men, the layout of the scrapyard, potential points of entry and exit. His military training kicked in, turning the chaos into a series of manageable variables. "We'll come back tomorrow," Daniel said, closing the notebook. "Get a closer look when it's quieter." Marcus frowned. "You think they'll let their guard down?" "They're cocky," Daniel said. "They don't think anyone in this town has the guts to stand up to them. We'll use that to our advantage." Logan's grin returned. "Man, I've missed this." Daniel smirked. "Let's just hope we don't miss." Back at Daniel's house, the three men sat around the kitchen table, going over their observations and sketching a rough map of the scrapyard. "They've got sentries near the entrance," Marcus said, marking the spots on the map. "And that garage is probably where they keep their vehicles and supplies." "The building in the back," Logan added, pointing to it. "That's where they'll keep anything important. Money, weapons, maybe even plans." Daniel nodded. "That's our target, but we'll need to be smart about it. One mistake, and this whole thing blows up in our faces." Marcus glanced at him. "And if it does? Then we adapt," Daniel said, his voice firm. "We've faced worse." The three men exchanged a glance, their unspoken bond as strong as ever. They had fought side by side in war zones, survived impossible odds, and emerged stronger. This was a new battlefield. But their mission remained the same: protect the innocent, destroy the enemy, and leave no one behind. As the clock ticked past midnight, Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes heavy but his mind racing. Tomorrow, they would take the first step in dismantling the Iron Vultures, and they wouldn't stop until Cedar Hollow was free. The next evening, as the last traces of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Daniel, Marcus, and Logan made their way back to the scrapyard. The town of Cedar Hollow was quiet, its streets empty save for the occasional car or flickering porch light. It was the kind of silence that felt heavier than peace, the kind that carried fear. The trio parked the SUV a mile away and moved on foot, cutting through back roads and overgrown fields. They were dressed in dark clothing, their steps silent as they approached the fence surrounding the scrapyard. The distant sounds of laughter and clanging metal confirmed that the gang was still active. Daniel crouched low, his eyes scanning the perimeter. Same setup as last night. 2 sentries at the front gate, 1 patrolling the garage, and a few more near the fire pit. "Any changes?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doesn't look like it," Daniel replied. "They're cocky. That's good for us." Logan smirked, his voice low but tinged with humor. "Man, I almost feel bad for these guys. They have no idea what's coming." "Save the jokes for later," Marcus said. "Let's focus." Daniel nodded, pulling a pair of wire cutters from his bag. He worked quickly and quietly, snipping a section of the chain-link fence to create a gap just big enough for them to slip through. Once inside, they stuck to the shadows, moving along the edges of the yard to avoid detection. The first sentry was a young man with a shaved head and a hoodie bearing the Iron Vulture's insignia, a rusted bird with spread wings. He leaned against the garage, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of the 3 figures closing in on him. Marcus was the first to strike. He moved like a shadow, wrapping an arm around the man's neck and cutting off his air before he could make a sound. The sentry struggled for a moment before going limp, and Marcus lowered him gently to the ground. "One down," Marcus whispered, signaling for the others to move forward. The second sentry was more alert, his flashlight sweeping the yard in slow, deliberate arcs. Daniel motioned for Logan to flank him while he approached head-on. When the sentry turned toward a noise Logan made deliberately, Daniel surged forward, striking the man's wrist to disarm him before landing a precise blow to his temple. The sentry crumpled without a sound. "Clear," Daniel murmured. He glanced at Logan, who gave a thumbs up before pointing toward the garage. The third sentry was inside, his silhouette visible through a cracked window. He was pacing, a cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. Daniel motioned for the team to hold position while he crept closer, using the sound of the man's footsteps to mask his approach. When the moment was right, Daniel slipped through the open garage door and took the sentry by surprise, pinning him against the wall. "Don't fight," Daniel growled, "and you might walk away from this." The sentry's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded, his hands going up in surrender. Daniel tied his wrists with a zip tie and gagged him before dragging him into a corner. With the sentries neutralized, the team regrouped near the fire pit, where several gang members were gathered, drinking and laughing. The glow of the fire cast flickering shadows across their faces, making them look more menacing than they were. "We can't take them all at once," Marcus whispered. "Too much noise." "Agreed," Daniel said. "We bypass them and head for the back building. That's where they'll keep anything important." Logan's grin returned. "Finally. I was starting to think we wouldn't get to the fun part." The three men moved carefully, weaving between stacks of rusted car parts and scrap metal. The gang members by the fire pit were too distracted to notice them, their laughter carrying over the crackle of flames. As they reached the back building, Daniel paused, motioning for the others to stop. The door was slightly ajar, and faint voices could be heard from inside. "Sounds like a meeting," Marcus murmured. "Could be their leaders." "Then we're in the right place," Daniel said. "We move quietly, gather intel first. If we find something solid, we take it and get out." The team slipped into the building, their footsteps muffled by the worn concrete floor. Inside, a dim light flickered above a large table covered in papers, maps, and a laptop. Four men stood around it, their faces serious as they discussed something in hushed tones. "We need to move faster," one of them said, his voice sharp. "The next shipment is due tomorrow, and the feds are already sniffing around." "Relax," another replied. "As long as we've got Razor running the locals, we're untouchable. The boss is handling everything else." Daniel's eyes narrowed. This was bigger than he'd thought. Razor was the gang's leader, but there were clearly others pulling the strings, people with resources and connections. Logan pulled out his phone and began snapping pictures of the documents on the table, his movements silent and precise. Marcus scanned the room, his hand resting on his knife in case things went south. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes fixed on a map marked with red X's. Each mark corresponded to a location in Cedar Hollow: businesses, homes, even a church. "They're planning more attacks," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Before they could gather more, one of the men at the table glanced toward the door and froze. "Hey, who the hell are you?" The room erupted into chaos as the gang members reached for weapons. Daniel didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing the nearest man and slamming him against the table. Papers scattered as the others shouted and scrambled. Logan and Marcus moved in, disarming the others with swift, practiced precision. Within seconds, all four gang members were subdued, zip ties securing their wrists. "Talk," Daniel ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "Who's pulling your strings?" One of the men glared at him, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. "You're dead, Marine. You don't know what you're messing with." Daniel grabbed the man by the collar, pulling him close. "Try me, Razor." The man spat. "He's running the show here, but he answers to someone else. We don't know who." Daniel's grip tightened. "Where's Razor now?" "Meeting his suppliers," the man said, his voice trembling. "Warehouse on the east side of town. Midnight." Daniel glanced at Marcus and Logan, who nodded. They had what they needed. The team moved quickly, leaving the gang members tied up and the intel secured. As they slipped back into the yard, the sound of voices near the fire pit grew louder. They're going to notice something's wrong soon, Marcus said. Then we move fast, Daniel replied. They reached the fence just as a shout rang out behind them. One of the gang members by the fire pit had spotted the open garage door. Hey, we've got intruders, Logan cursed under his breath as the gang scrambled to their feet. Grabbing bats and crowbars, Daniel motioned for the others to go through the fence first, covering their retreat as he pulled out a smoke grenade from his bag. He pulled the pin and tossed it toward the fire pit. Thick gray smoke billowed out, obscuring their movements as the gang shouted and coughed. By the time the smoke cleared, Daniel, Marcus, and Logan were gone, leaving behind a rattled and confused group of gang members. Back at Daniel's house, the three men spread the stolen documents across the kitchen table. The evidence was damning, proof of the Iron Vulture's plans, their funding, and their leadership. It's all here, Logan said, his voice tinged with excitement. Enough to put these guys away for good. Not yet, Daniel said, his gaze fixed on the map. Not until we take out Razor. Marcus nodded. Then we hit the warehouse. The dim glow of Daniel's kitchen light illuminated the documents spread across the table. Maps, shipment logs, bank receipts. Each piece of paper painted a grim picture of the Iron Vulture's operations. Daniel's jaw tightened as he traced a finger over the map, landing on a location circled in red, an abandoned warehouse on the east side of Cedar Hollow. Razor's meeting his suppliers here at midnight, Daniel said, his voice steady but laced with tension. If we can get to him, we can dismantle the operation from the top down. Marcus leaned over the table, studying the layout. It won't be easy. This warehouse is big, with plenty of places to hide. And if he's meeting suppliers, they won't come alone. That's why we go prepared, Daniel replied, glancing at Logan. How's the gear looking? Logan sat cross-legged on the floor, inspecting their equipment, knives, zip ties, flashlights, and a compact drone. He gave a crooked grin. We're not exactly SEAL Team 6. But it'll do. Drone's ready to go. We'll get a bird's eye view before we go in. Marcus straightened. What's the plan? Daniel grabbed a notepad and started sketching a rough layout based on the intel they had. The warehouse has 3 main entrances, one in the front, one on the west side, and a loading dock in the back. Razor will probably be near the center, somewhere secure. Logan pointed at the map. If they've got suppliers coming in, they'll likely use the loading dock. Exactly, Daniel said. We'll use the drone to scout first. Once we confirm Razor's location, we split up. Marcus, you cover the back entrance, cut off their escape route. Logan, you and I will hit the main area and take Razor. And the suppliers? Marcus asked. Daniel's gaze hardened. If they're involved, we take them down too. By 11:30 p.m., the team was parked half a mile from the warehouse. The night was moonless, the air heavy with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Daniel adjusted his gear, double-checking the drone's controls before handing them to Logan. You're on recon, Daniel said. Give us the layout, and then we move. Logan nodded, his focus sharpening as he launched the drone into the sky. Its quiet hum faded as it ascended, the live feed appearing on his tablet. Got eyes on the warehouse, Logan murmured, guiding the drone toward the building. 2 guards at the front entrance, one on the roof, and, yep, there's activity near the loading dock. 3 vehicles, looks like they're unloading crates. Marcus peered over his shoulder. How many men? Hard to say, Logan replied. I count at least 8 outside, but there's probably more inside. Daniel nodded. Keep scanning. We need Razor's exact position. The drone circled the building, its infrared camera picking up movement near the center of the warehouse. A group of men stood around a makeshift table, one of them gesturing animatedly. Razor's distinct bald head and the jagged scar on his cheek were unmistakable. Got him, Logan said. He's in the central section, near what looks like a bunch of pallets. Good, Daniel said. Bring the drone back. We're moving. The team split up as planned. Marcus moved toward the back entrance, staying low and sticking to the shadows. Logan and Daniel approached the front, their steps silent as they avoided the patrolling guards. At the back entrance, Marcus crouched near the loading dock, his knife glinting faintly in the low light. He waited until the nearest guard turned away before striking. With a quick, practiced motion, he incapacitated the man and dragged him into the shadows. He glanced toward the vehicles. watching as two men unloaded crates marked with the Iron Vulture's emblem. "Two at the dock," Marcus whispered into his comms. "I'll handle it." "Copy that," Daniel replied. "We're moving in." At the front entrance, Daniel and Logan took out the guards with swift precision. Their movements synchronized and silent. Daniel motioned for Logan to follow as they slipped through the open door. Entering the vast, dimly lit warehouse, stacks of crates and pallets created a maze-like interior. The hum of machinery and the muffled voices of Razor's crew filled the air. Daniel gestured for Logan to cover the right side while he moved left, inching closer to the central area where Razor was holding court. Razor stood at the center of a group of men, his voice carrying over the noise. "The shipments are on schedule. By next week, we'll have enough firepower to lock this town down for good." Daniel's fists clenched at the words, but he held his position, waiting for the right moment. Logan crept up behind a stack of crates, signaling that he was ready. "Now," Daniel whispered. The two moved as one, emerging from the shadows with weapons drawn. "Nobody move," Daniel barked, his voice echoing through the warehouse. The men froze, their hands instinctively going up. Razor, however, didn't flinch. His cold eyes locked on Daniel, and a slow smile spread across his face. Well, Razor drawled. "If it isn't the Marine. I was wondering when you'd show up." "Drop the act," Daniel said, his voice steady. "This is over. Hands where I can see them." Razor's smile widened. "You think you've got me cornered? You're outnumbered, Carter. This is my town. We'll see about that," Daniel replied. Before Razor could respond, a loud crash came from the loading dock, followed by shouts. Marcus's voice crackled over the comms. "We've got company. More trucks just pulled in, armed." Razor laughed, the sound cold and mocking. "You're in over your head, Marine." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Logan, secure the evidence. I'll handle this." Logan hesitated but nodded, moving toward the table where Razor's documents and laptop sat. "Handle me?" Razor sneered. "Let's see you try." With that, Razor lunged, swinging a metal pipe he'd grabbed from the table. Daniel dodged the first swing, countering with a sharp jab to Razor's side. The gang leader staggered but recovered quickly, his grin never faltering. "You've got fight," Razor said, circling Daniel. "Too bad it won't save you." Daniel didn't respond. He kept his movements tight, dodging Razor's wild swings and delivering precise strikes when openings appeared. Razor's strength was evident, but Daniel's training gave him the upper hand. Meanwhile, chaos erupted throughout the warehouse. Marcus fought near the loading dock, taking down armed men with brutal efficiency. Logan scrambled to gather evidence, ducking behind crates as bullets ricocheted around him. Razor swung again, but Daniel caught the pipe, twisting it out of his hands. With a powerful shove, he sent Razor sprawling to the ground. Daniel stood over him, his breathing steady despite the exertion. "This ends now," Daniel said, his voice low and deadly. Before Razor could respond, the wail of sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, and the sound of screeching tires signaled the arrival of law enforcement. Razor's grin faltered as officers stormed the warehouse, shouting commands. Daniel stepped back, letting the cops take over. Razor and his men were quickly subdued, their weapons confiscated, and the evidence Logan had gathered secured. As the officers led Razor away in handcuffs, he shot Daniel a venomous glare. "This isn't over, Carter." Daniel watched him go, his expression unreadable. "It is for you." Hours later, as dawn broke over Cedar Hollow, Daniel, Marcus, and Logan sat on the porch of Daniel's house, watching the sun rise. The operation had been a success, but the weight of the night's events lingered. "We did good," Marcus said, breaking the silence. Daniel nodded. "We took out their leader, gathered enough evidence to dismantle the operation, and sent a message." Logan smirked. "Yeah, but I'm still sore as hell." The three men shared a quiet laugh, the tension easing slightly. The fight wasn't over, not completely, but for now, they'd won a battle that mattered. And that was enough. The morning sun bathed Cedar Hollow in warm light, casting long shadows over Daniel's repaired porch. Inside, the house buzzed with quiet activity as Daniel, Marcus, and Logan organized the evidence they had gathered from the raid on Razor's warehouse. The documents, shipment logs, and the laptop Logan had secured were spread out on the kitchen table. A chaotic but valuable trove of information. Logan tapped away at the laptop. His brows furrowed in concentration. This thing's encrypted, but I've seen worse. Give me some time, and I'll crack it. Marcus leaned against the counter, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. The cops took Razor, but that doesn't mean it's over. You saw how deep this goes. Razor's just one piece of the puzzle. Daniel nodded, flipping through a folder of receipts and wire transfers. Exactly. This operation spans multiple states, and there's big money involved. We've got evidence tying them to arms trafficking, property destruction, and hate crimes, but we still don't know who's funding them. Logan looked up from the laptop. And whoever's at the top isn't going to let this go quietly. If they've got politicians or corporate backers, they'll start covering their tracks. Marcus set down his mug, his jaw tightening, which means we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more time they have to bury this. Daniel ran a hand over his face, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. You're both right, but we need to be smart about this. We can't just storm into another warehouse without a plan. Logan smirked, leaning back in his chair. So, what's the play, boss? Daniel's eyes narrowed as he stared at the evidence on the table. We follow the money. These wire transfers and bank accounts, they'll lead us to whoever's pulling the strings. By mid-afternoon, Logan had cracked the laptop's encryption. The screen flickered to life, revealing a wealth of emails, spreadsheets, and encrypted files. Logan whistled low. Jackpot. Razor wasn't just running a gang, he was managing logistics for a whole network. Daniel and Marcus crowded around the screen as Logan navigated the files. One email chain caught their attention, a series of messages between Razor and someone identified only as KC. The emails discussed shipments, payments, and upcoming operations, all written in coded language. KC, Marcus muttered. Who the hell is that? Whoever they are, they're in charge, Daniel said, pointing to a line in one email. Razor keeps deferring to them, asking for approval, reporting on progress. They're calling the shots. Logan clicked on another file, revealing a list of addresses and contact numbers. Looks like we've got some leads. These could be drop sites, safe houses, or other meeting spots. Daniel studied the list, his mind racing. We need to narrow it down. Figure out where KC is operating from and hit them before they can regroup. Marcus nodded. We can't let them get comfortable. If they're as organized as this makes them look, they'll be preparing to counterstrike. As the three men worked, Maya arrived with a bag of groceries, her face lined with worry. She set the bag on the counter and crossed her arms, words spreading about what happened at the warehouse. Daniel glanced at her. What are people saying? That Razor's in custody, but some of his crew are still out there. Maya said. People are scared. Daniel, they're worried the vultures will retaliate. They're not wrong, Marcus said. Taking down Razor was a blow, but it wasn't a knockout. The rest of the gang could still cause trouble. Maya turned to Daniel, her voice firm. You need to let the police handle this. Daniel shook his head. The police can't handle this. Maya, we've seen how slow they're to act, and how deep the corruption goes. If we don't finish this, no one will. Her eyes softened, but the worry remained. Just promise me you'll be careful. Cedar Hollow can't afford to lose someone like you. Daniel gave her a faint smile. I'll be careful, I promise. That evening, Logan called the team into the living room. He'd cross-referenced the addresses from Razor's laptop with local records and utility bills, narrowing the list to one location that stood out, an old industrial site on the edge of Cedar Hollow. This place checks all the boxes, Logan explained, pointing to a satellite image on his laptop. It's remote, has minimal activity, and the power usage spiked last month, way higher than what you'd expect for an abandoned building. Sounds like a base of operations, Marcus said. Daniel nodded. If KC's involved, that's where we'll find them. Logan leaned back, his grin returning. Then let's gear up. Time to pay KC a visit. The industrial site loomed in the darkness as Daniel, Marcus, and Logan parked a safe distance away. The building was large and dilapidated, its broken windows and rusted walls blending into the surrounding overgrowth. A single light flickered near the entrance, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. Logan launched the drone again, its camera feeding a live stream to his tablet. 3 vehicles parked out front. I see 2 guards near the entrance and 1 patrolling the perimeter. Marcus adjusted his night vision goggles. Could be more inside. What's the plan? Daniel studied the screen, his mind racing. We go in quiet, take out the guards, secure the building, and find KC if things go loud. We adapt. Logan smirked. Just how I like it. Moving under the cover of darkness, the team approached the site, their steps silent and deliberate. Marcus neutralized the perimeter guard with a swift chokehold, dragging him into the shadows. Logan took out one of the entrance guards with a well-aimed strike, while Daniel handled the other, his movements precise and efficient. Inside, the building was a maze of old machinery and crates. Voices echoed from deeper within, and the faint glow of monitors illuminated a makeshift office in the distance. That's our target, Daniel whispered, signaling for the others to follow. As they crept closer, they spotted a man seated at a desk, his face partially obscured by the glow of the screens. A phone was pressed to his ear, and his tone was sharp and authoritative. Yeah, the shipments are delayed, the man said. No, Razor screwed up. We're reorganizing, but the next phase is still on schedule. Daniel's heart pounded. This had to be KC. He motioned for Logan and Marcus to fan out, cutting off any potential escape routes. Once they were in position, Daniel stepped into the office, his weapon raised. Hands where I can see them, he barked. KC froze, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward Daniel. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice calm but cold. The only mistake was thinking you could get away with this. Daniel shot back. It's over. KC's lips curled into a smirk. You think this ends with me? You're in way over your head, Marine. The tension in the room was palpable as Daniel faced KC, his weapon steady. Behind him, Marcus and Logan stood ready, covering the office's exits to ensure their target couldn't escape. The dim glow of the monitors cast eerie shadows across KC's face, but his smirk remained unshaken. You've got no idea what you're dealing with, KC said, his voice low and calculated. This operation isn't just about Cedar Hollow. It's bigger than one gang. Bigger than one town. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then it'll hurt more when it all comes crashing down. Hands where I can see them. KC chuckled, slowly raising his hands. You're ambitious. I'll give you that. But do you really think you can stop this? Even if you take me out, someone else will step in. That's how power works. Logan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. Yeah, well, we'll take out the next guy too. Now shut up and cooperate before I lose my patience. KC ignored Logan, his sharp eyes fixed on Daniel. You're not like the rest of these small-town idiots. You're military, disciplined, controlled, but that won't save you when the people funding this come after you. Who's funding it? Daniel demanded, his voice cold. Names. Now. KC smirked, leaning back slightly. You think I'll just hand that over? You're going to have to do better than threats. Marine. Before Daniel could respond, a sudden clatter echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Marcus spun toward the sound, his weapon raised. We've got company. A group of armed men burst into the room, their weapons drawn. KC's smirk widened as he dropped to the ground, shielding himself behind the desk. Take them, one of the men shouted, opening fire. Daniel, Logan, and Marcus dove for cover as bullets ricocheted off the metal walls. Logan ducked behind a stack of crates, returning fire with calculated precision. This just got a whole lot messier. Daniel crouched low, his mind racing. KC was pinned behind the desk, but the armed reinforcements were advancing quickly. If they didn't act fast, their target could slip away, or worse, call for more backup. Marcus, cover the right side, Daniel shouted over the gunfire. Logan, keep them pinned. You got it, Marcus barked, moving to a better position. His shots were precise, taking down two of the attackers and forcing the others to scatter. Daniel shifted his focus to KC, who was inching toward a side door while the chaos unfolded. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Not so fast. He broke from cover, sprinting toward the desk as bullets whizzed past him. KC saw him coming and grabbed a gun from the floor. But Daniel was faster. He kicked the weapon out of KC's hand and slammed him against the desk. You're not going anywhere, Daniel growled. KC struggled, but Daniel's grip was unrelenting. You're making a mistake, Carter. You think this ends with me. But it doesn't. You can't win. Daniel forced KC's hands behind his back, securing him with zip ties. Watch me. Meanwhile, Logan and Marcus continued to hold their ground. Logan fired a shot that shattered a light overhead, plunging part of the room into darkness. That should slow them down. Marcus used the cover of shadows to reposition, flanking the remaining attackers. One by one, he neutralized them with precise, silent movements. When the final man dropped, the room fell eerily silent, save for the sound of heavy breathing and the faint hum of the monitors. Logan emerged from behind the crates, his rifle still raised. Clear? Clear, Marcus confirmed, stepping over one of the downed attackers. Nice work. Daniel stood, dragging KC to his feet. We've got what we came for. Let's move before more of them show up. The team navigated back through the industrial site, KC stumbling as Daniel kept a firm grip on his arm. Outside, the night was still and quiet, the earlier chaos contained within the building. They loaded KC into the back of their SUV. Securing him tightly, Logan climbed into the driver's seat, glancing at Daniel in the rearview mirror. Where to? Daniel's expression was grim. Safe house. We need to get him talking before we hand him over. As they drove, KC smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. You think you've won? You've barely scratched the surface. This network is bigger than you can imagine. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. Then you'd better start talking. Who's at the top? Where are the funds coming from? KC laughed softly. You really think I'm going to betray them? You don't know what you're up against. They don't just own this town, they own people. Cops, politicians, judges. You don't stand a chance. Marcus turned in his seat, his glare icy. We'll see about that. At the safe house, the team interrogated KC in a dimly lit basement. His smug demeanor faltered as Daniel pressed him for answers, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. You can either cooperate and make this easier on yourself, Daniel said, his voice calm but firm, or you can stay silent and let your bosses throw you under the bus when this all comes crashing down. KC hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. They don't care about you, Marcus added, his tone sharp. You're just another expendable asset. But if you give us what we need, you might still have a chance. KC exhaled shakily, his defiance cracking. All right, I'll talk, but you have no idea what you're walking into. Try us, Daniel said. KC swallowed hard, then began to spill details about the funding, the shipments, and the key players behind the operation. Names, locations, and plans poured out, painting a picture of a sprawling network that extended far beyond Cedar Hollow. Daniel exchanged a glance with Marcus and Logan, a shared determination passing between them. They had what they needed to take the fight to the next level. As the sun began to rise, Daniel stood outside the safe house, staring into the horizon. The weight of KC's revelation settled heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about Cedar Hollow anymore. It was a nationwide operation, and taking it down would require more than just 3 determined men. Marcus joined him, his expression somber. We've got the intel. Now what? Daniel's gaze hardened. We take it to the feds. But first, we make sure the people in Cedar Hollow are safe. This town is ground zero, and we're not leaving it undefended. Logan stepped outside, his usual smirk tempered by exhaustion. So, what's next? Another raid? Another ambush? Daniel turned to face his team, his voice steady and resolute. We dismantle this piece by piece. Razor's gone. KC's in custody. Now we follow the threads and bring the whole damn thing down. The 3 men stood together, their bond unshaken despite the battles ahead. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But they were ready. The safe house was quiet, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound as Daniel, Marcus, and Logan reviewed the notes they'd gathered from KC's interrogation. The names he'd given them painted a picture of a sprawling network. A labyrinth of money, influence, and hate stretching far beyond Cedar Hollow. Marcus tapped the table, breaking the silence. These names, a lot of them are powerful. Business owners, local officials, even a state senator. If this goes public, it's going to be a firestorm. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the list. That's exactly why we need to handle this carefully. We can't just hand this over to the local police. Some of them are in on it. Logan crossed his arms, his voice skeptical. And the feds? You think they're going to swoop in and save the day? They've got their own politics to deal with. Daniel's jaw tightened. They're our best shot. If we bring them solid evidence, enough to make it impossible to ignore, they'll have to act. Yeah, Marcus said, leaning forward. But the moment these people get wind of this, they'll start covering their tracks. We need to move fast. Daniel nodded, his mind already turning over the possibilities. We need someone on the inside. A contact who can take this straight to the right people. Logan raised an eyebrow. You got someone in mind? Daniel hesitated, then pulled out his phone. An old friend, Agent Sarah Delaney. She's with the FBI now. Based out of Denver. If anyone can get this in front of the right people, it's her. Daniel stepped outside, dialing Sarah's number. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Delaney, she said, her tone brisk and professional. It's Carter, Daniel said, keeping his voice low. I need your help. There was a pause, then a shift in her tone. Daniel, it's been years. What's going on? I don't have time to explain everything, he said, but I've uncovered something big, a network of arms trafficking, corruption, and hate crimes. It's tied to Cedar Hollow. But it's bigger than that. I've got names, locations, and evidence. I need someone I can trust to take this up the chain. Sarah's voice hardened. That's a heavy claim. Daniel, you sure about this? I'm sure, he said, but I can't do this alone. If we don't act fast, they'll start erasing the evidence. Sarah sighed. All right, I'm listening. What do you have? Daniel spent the next 15 minutes outlining what they'd discovered. Razor's gang. Casey's involvement, and the names they'd extracted during the interrogation. When he finished, there was a long silence on the line. This is bigger than I thought, Sarah said finally. I'll need to see the evidence myself before I can take this to my superiors. I figured as much, Daniel said. Can you meet us? I'll head your way, Sarah said. There's an old motel on Route 12, just outside Cedar Hollow. Meet me there in 3 hours. And Daniel, be careful. If this is as big as you say, you're stepping on some very dangerous toes. 3 hours later, Daniel, Marcus, and Logan arrived at the motel. It was a run-down place. The kind of spot where anonymity was the main selling point. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Sarah was waiting for them, leaning against a black sedan. She was dressed casually, but her sharp eyes scanned the area with the precision of a trained agent. Carter, she said as they approached, her expression both curious and cautious. You weren't kidding about the urgency. Daniel nodded, shaking her hand. Sarah, this is Marcus and Logan. They've been with me through this whole mess. Sarah gave them a quick nod. All right, let's see what you've got. Inside one of the motel rooms, the team laid out the evidence, the documents, the laptop, and the notes from Casey's interrogation. Sarah studied everything carefully, her brow furrowing as she pieced together the web of connections. This is solid, she said, glancing up at Daniel, but it's not enough to bring down the whole network. We'll need corroboration, more direct links between the names on this list and the crimes they're funding. Logan frowned. So what? We're supposed to dig up even more dirt while these people keep operating? Sarah shook her head. No, we build a case and strike when it's strong enough to stick. But I'll need time to get approval for a full investigation. Time we don't have, Marcus said, his voice sharp. These people are already regrouping. If we don't hit them now, they'll vanish. Daniel placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, his tone calm but firm. She's right. If we move too soon, we risk losing everything. But we don't stop working. We keep gathering evidence while Sarah does her part. Sarah looked at Daniel, her expression serious. I'll take this back to Denver tonight. But you need to watch your backs. If these people find out you're working against them, they won't hesitate to eliminate the threat. Daniel met her gaze. We're ready for whatever comes. After Sarah left, the team returned to the safe house, their minds racing with the weight of the coming battle. The next morning, news broke of Razor's arrest and the raid on the warehouse. The media latched onto the story, exposing the Iron Vulture's crimes and sparking outrage in Cedar Hollow. But the news also had a ripple effect. The names on Casey's list started disappearing from public view, deleting social media accounts, resigning from positions, and distancing themselves from any connection to the gang. They're spooked, Logan said, scrolling through the news on his tablet. This is the start of the cover-up. Daniel's expression was grim. Then we stay ahead of them. Keep the pressure on. Marcus nodded. And if they come after us? Daniel's gaze hardened. Then we finish what we started. That evening, as the team reviewed their next steps, Marcus leaned forward, his voice thoughtful. What if we bait them out? Make them come to us? Logan raised an eyebrow. You want to poke the bear? Marcus smirked. More like lure it into a cage. If we can get one of the higher-ups to meet with us, we might get the final piece we need. Daniel considered the idea, his mind racing. It's risky, but it could work. If we make it look like KC's still in play, they might try to reconnect with him. Logan grinned. Now you're thinking like a saboteur. Daniel nodded slowly. All right, let's set the trap. The team worked tirelessly over the next 2 days, setting their plan into motion. Using the notes and communications from KC's laptop, they crafted a believable message that would make it appear as if he was still operational and reaching out to his network. Logan sat at the dining table, typing on a burner laptop. KC's tone was always cocky, but he knew how to be persuasive. Let's see if we can channel that. Marcus smirked from his spot by the window, keeping watch. You're surprisingly good at this. Logan, don't ask why. Logan replied with a grin, his fingers flying across the keyboard. There, the message is simple but pointed. Phase 2 proceeds as planned. Need verification of readiness. Meet to discuss. Daniel reviewed the message, his expression thoughtful. Good. It's vague enough to avoid giving too much away but direct enough to get their attention. Where do we want to stage this meet? Marcus asked. Daniel grabbed a map and unfolded it on the table. He circled an old grain mill on the outskirts of Cedar Hollow. Here, it's isolated, easy to control, and if things go sideways, we've got plenty of exits. Sounds perfect, Logan said, hitting send. Now we wait. Less than a day later, the burner phone they'd linked to KC's alias buzzed with a reply. Daniel answered on speakerphone, his voice low and steady. Speak, he said, mimicking KC's clipped tone. The voice on the other end was cautious but authoritative. The timeline is compromised. Razor's failure has drawn attention. We need assurances before proceeding. Meet at the designated location. Daniel exchanged a glance with Marcus and Logan. Understood, he replied. Bring what we need to close the deal. The call ended, and Daniel exhaled slowly. They're coming. Marcus leaned forward. So, who do you think we'll get? Someone high enough to make decisions but low enough to handle damage control. Daniel said. They'll bring muscle, but we'll be ready. The team arrived at the grain mill well before the scheduled meeting time. The mill was a crumbling structure, long abandoned, with multiple entry points and vantage spots. Logan set up surveillance equipment, including a drone and motion-activated cameras, to monitor the surroundings. We need to control the space, Daniel said, pointing to the map. Logan, you'll stay on Overwatch. Marcus, you're with me inside. If things get messy, we funnel them toward the west exit. It's the easiest to defend. Logan nodded, securing the last camera. Got it. I'll be your eyes in the sky. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the mill in deep shadows, the tension among them grew. Each of them double-checked their gear, knowing the meeting could turn violent in an instant. At precisely 10 p.m., the sound of engines broke the stillness. 2 SUVs rolled up to the grain mill, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Logan's voice crackled over the comms. We've got 6 hostiles. 4 are armed. They're cautious. Daniel and Marcus watched from their hiding spot inside the mill as the vehicles came to a stop. The doors opened, and a group of men stepped out, led by a sharp-dressed figure, a man in his late 40s with graying hair and a commanding presence. That must be one of KC's handlers, Marcus whispered. The man surveyed the area before motioning for his men to follow him inside. KC, he called out, his voice echoing through the mill. You'd better have a damn good reason for this. We're exposed enough as it is. Daniel stepped into the open, his face partially obscured by shadows. Nice of you to come. The handler's eyes narrowed. You're not KC. No, Daniel said, his voice calm, but I've got everything he would have shared with you, and more. Let's talk. The handler's men tensed, their hands hovering near their weapons. Talk fast, the handler said. Why shouldn't I have my men kill you where you stand? Because if you do, everything you're protecting gets exposed, Daniel said, pulling a flash drive from his pocket and holding it up. This drive has names, accounts, and plans. I've already sent copies to a few trusted people. Kill me, And they'll make sure the whole world sees it. The handler's jaw tightened. You think you're clever. What do you want? Names. Daniel said bluntly. The people funding this. The ones at the top. The handler laughed coldly. You have no idea what you're asking for. Marcus emerged from the shadows. His weapon trained on the group. He's not asking. The handler's confidence wavered, but he stood his ground. Even if I told you, you wouldn't survive long enough to use it. These people don't just destroy enemies, they erase them. Daniel took a step closer. His gaze unflinching. That's our problem. Now talk. Before the handler could respond, Logan's urgent voice came through the comms. We've got incoming, 2 more SUVs. Armed reinforcements. The handler smirked. Looks like your time's up. Daniel grabbed the handler by the collar, dragging him behind a stack of crates as the sound of tires screeched outside. Marcus took cover, his weapon ready. Logan, what are we looking at? Daniel barked. 10 more, heavily armed. Logan replied, they're circling the mill. Then we hold our ground. Daniel said, his voice steady. Marcus, cover the main entrance. Logan, take out their drivers if they try to leave. You got it, Logan replied, the sound of his rifle snapping into place audible over the comms. The reinforcements stormed the mill, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Daniel and Marcus opened fire, their shots precise and controlled, forcing the attackers to scatter. The handler cowered behind the crates, shouting curses as the firefight intensified. Logan's voice came through again. Took out 1 SUV. The rest are dug in. Daniel motioned for Marcus to shift positions, covering his flank as he moved toward the handler. This is your last chance. Daniel growled. Tell me what I need to know, or I leave you to them. The handler's bravado cracked. All right. The top funder's name is Caldwell. He's a developer, big money. Lots of political ties. But he's not the only one. There's a network. Daniel's expression hardened. Where's Caldwell now? Denver, the handler said, his voice trembling. He operates out of an office downtown. Claims it's a real estate firm. But it's a front. Before Daniel could press further, a grenade landed nearby, its metallic clink drawing his attention. Move, he shouted, dragging the handler as the explosion rocked the mill. The explosion created a cloud of dust and debris, giving Daniel and Marcus the cover they needed to retreat. Logan provided suppressive fire from his vantage point, picking off attackers as the team made their way to the west exit. Once outside, they piled into their SUV, shoving the handler into the backseat. Logan joined them moments later, his rifle slung over his shoulder. That was close. Daniel started the engine, his expression grim. We've got what we need. Now it's time to end this. As they sped away from the mill, the handler sat silently in the backseat, his eyes wide with fear. Daniel glanced at him in the rearview mirror. You're going to help us take down Caldwell and the rest of his network. Or you'll wish you had. The handler swallowed hard, nodding. Whatever you say. The ride to the team's secondary safe house was tense. The handler sitting between Marcus and Logan in the backseat. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with the implications of the handler's revelations. Caldwell wasn't just a funder, he was the architect behind the operation, the linchpin holding the entire network together. As they arrived, Daniel pulled the SUV into the secluded driveway and parked under the cover of an old oak tree. Inside the safe house, Logan secured the handler to a chair while Marcus began organizing the intel they'd collected. The handler, pale and visibly shaken, finally broke the silence. You can't touch Caldwell. He's too powerful. Daniel crouched in front of him, his expression calm but unrelenting. Powerful people bleed the same as anyone else. You're going to give us everything we need to take him down. The handler hesitated, then nodded. Caldwell's office in Denver is where he runs everything, payments, logistics, and contacts. But if you go after him, he'll know. He's got layers of security. Then we cut through them, Marcus said, his voice firm. Over the next several hours, the team worked tirelessly to prepare. The handler provided detailed information about Caldwell's office, its layout, security systems, and personnel. Logan scouted the building remotely, using surveillance footage and public records to confirm their approach. It's a fortress, Logan said, pointing to the schematics on his laptop. Armed guards at the entrance, reinforced doors, and high-end surveillance. Getting in won't be easy. Daniel studied the screen, his jaw set. We've faced worse. We go in fast and coordinated. Logan, you'll disable the cameras and alarms remotely. Marcus, you're with me on the ground. Marcus nodded. What about Caldwell? He's priority one. Daniel said. We get to him. We get the evidence. And we get out. The following night, the team arrived in Denver under the cover of darkness. The city buzzed with life, unaware of the storm brewing in one of its gleaming office towers. Logan set up in a nearby building, his laptop glowing faintly as he worked to disable Caldwell's security. Cameras are down, Logan said through the comms. You're clear to move. Daniel and Marcus slipped through a side entrance, their movements silent and deliberate. The building was eerily quiet, the faint hum of fluorescent lights the only sound as they made their way toward Caldwell's office on the top floor. Guards at the elevator, Logan warned. 2 of them. Daniel signaled to Marcus, and the 2 moved into position. With precise efficiency, they subdued the guards, leaving them unconscious and out of sight. Elevators clear, Daniel said. We're moving up. As the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Daniel and Marcus stepped out, their weapons at the ready. Caldwell's office was at the end of the hall, its glass doors revealing the man himself seated at a massive desk. Seemingly unbothered, Caldwell looked up as they entered, his expression cool and unshaken. So, you're the ones causing all this trouble. I've heard about you. Then you know why we're here, Daniel said, leveling his weapon at Caldwell. Caldwell smirked, leaning back in his chair. You think you're heroes? You're just a nuisance. Do you have any idea how much money and influence you're meddling with? We don't care about your money, Marcus said, stepping forward. We care about the lives you've ruined. Caldwell's smirk faltered slightly, but his arrogance remained. You won't make it out of this building alive. Daniel's voice was ice cold. That's what your people said about Razor and KC, and look where they are now. Before Caldwell could respond, Logan's voice crackled over the comms. You've got company, reinforcements heading your way. Daniel grabbed Caldwell by the collar, hauling him to his feet. You're coming with us. Caldwell struggled, but Marcus shoved him forward, forcing him to move. They retraced their steps toward the elevator, but the sound of approaching footsteps forced them to divert. Stairwell, Daniel said, leading the way. The team descended quickly, Caldwell stumbling as they pushed him forward. Logan's voice came through again. They're converging on the lower levels. You'll need to move fast. As they reached the ground floor, the building erupted into chaos. Armed guards swarmed the lobby, their weapons raised. Daniel and Marcus opened fire, their movements precise as they cleared a path to the exit. Caldwell shouted in protest. You're insane. You'll never. Shut up, Marcus growled, dragging him along. Outside, Logan was waiting in a getaway car, the engine running. Get in, he shouted as the team piled in, shoving Caldwell into the backseat. The car screeched away from the building, bullets pinging off its frame as the guards fired after them. Logan weaved through the city streets, his hands steady on the wheel. We're clear, Logan said after several tense minutes, his voice calm. For now. Back at the safe house, Caldwell sat bound to a chair, his once cocky demeanor replaced with anger and fear. Daniel stood over him, his gaze unyielding. Your operation is over, Daniel said. We have everything we need to take you down. Caldwell sneered. You think you've won? My people will bury you. Daniel leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous. Your people are next. The evidence they'd gathered from Caldwell's office was damning. Financial records, communications, and detailed plans tying him directly to the network's crimes. Sarah arrived hours later, her expression a mix of relief and determination as she reviewed the files. This is it, she said. This is enough to dismantle the entire network. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was massive. Caldwell and his associates were arrested, their ties to hate crimes and corruption exposed in a national scandal. The Iron Vultures were dismantled, their operations dismantled piece by piece. Cedar Hollow began to heal. Families returned, businesses reopened, and the community came together to rebuild what had been torn apart. Daniel, Marcus, and Logan remained in the background, their role in the events unacknowledged but deeply felt. One evening, as the sun set over the repaired streets of Cedar Hollow, Daniel stood on his porch, watching children play in the yard across the street. Marcus and Logan joined him, beers in hand. We did good, Marcus said, clinking his bottle against Daniel's. Daniel nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, we did. The fight wasn't over, not entirely. But for now, Cedar Hollow was safe. And that was enough. Months later, Daniel received a letter from Sarah. Inside was a simple note. The case is closed. Justice served. Thanks for trusting me. Enclosed was a newspaper clipping, detailing Caldwell's sentencing and the dismantling of the network. At the bottom, Sarah had written, "Heroes don't always wear capes. But sometimes they wear scars. You did good, Carter." Daniel folded the note and set it aside, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The work wasn't done, but for the first time, he allowed himself to rest.